Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to today's Hindu analysis. Let's begin with the first article that is based on the government's recent decision to withdraw the Personal Data Protection Bill. We discussed about this bill a few days back as well. If you remember, the government of India in this session of the parliament, that was a monsoon session, announced that they are withdrawing the Personal Data Protection Bill. We discussed that this particular bill actually has provisions about the data protection. For example, if you give some data to social media websites such as Facebook, Instagram, etc., can they use that data for something else? Can they sell their data to some third party or not? Can they use it for other purposes or not? This is what was the data protection bill all about. It had said that for anyone's data to be used again by the social media enterprises or by anyone else, they need to first take the consent of the person whose data it is. However, there were a lot of questions about many provisions of the law, and that is why the government has finally decided to withdraw it and announce that we will be working on a new kind of a law to bring a comprehensive legal framework. They also said that we will be taking into consideration the report given by the Joint Parliamentary Committee and see what they have recommended. Now, just as it always happens when the government withdraws a bill or when the government passes a bill, there are always two sides of the story. Half of the people who are not really in favor of the government would obviously appreciate the government taking back the bill. However, the other half of the people would obviously question the government on taking back the bill. The author here falls in the second category. So she is actually not happy with the government's decision to withdraw this bill. She's saying that even if the government has withdrawn the bill, the government should have given a clear timeline. That is, within how many months or how many years will they bring a new bill, because this is a necessity today. And this is actually true. Just think of it. When you give some data to Facebook or Instagram or so many other websites that you have, all of a sudden you would see that even without giving your number to anyone, you will start receiving calls. Sir, do you want a credit card? Sir, do you want to have a free trip to Maldives? Sir, do you want this or that? All these places are actually getting your number because your number and your identity has been sold to them. In fact, so much so that today data is the most precious commodity. Any website, any portal that claims to have a lot of authentic data is a very profitable business model because they can sell that data and earn a lot of money. This also brings in the misuse of data, and this is why there have been questions asked on it. In fact, if you look at the American politics, there have been so much allegations that Facebook has been selling data so that the political parties can target their voters in a particular manner. That is why the need for such a bill has been felt in India as well. Now, if you go back, it was in 2017 that the Supreme Court, in the famous K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, had said that the right to privacy is a part of fundamental rights. The Supreme Court had also given the judgment that resulted in the constitution of the B.N. Shri Krishna Committee. If you remember, we had discussed the provisions of this committee just a few days back in one of the other CNAs. You can check that out as well. The committee then had given a draft to the government, which was later converted into the bill with certain changes made from the government side. The government first introduced the bill in December 2019. The author is saying that this bill took 5 long years for the government to actually make the final bill. And by withdrawing it, the government is actually wasting its effort of 5 long years. The author here is not saying that the bill was perfect. In fact, the author herself has pointed out certain problems in the bill. But what she means to say is that the government should have made changes and passed the bill in the meanwhile rather than waiting for an entirely new bill. These are the main problems in the bill that she has written in this article. Number one, the bill gives a power to the state of exemption, so they can actually be exempted as per the law, meaning that in certain cases a government would have the power to misuse or use your data without even taking your consent. While the private entities can never be exempted, the government has kept this option with itself that it can exempt itself in certain situations in the interest of national security or public order. The problem is that these exemptions give a lot of discretionary power to the government. They don't have to ask for parliament's permission or go anywhere else. They can just use their own discretion. The second problem with the bill is that the regulator, that is the Data Protection Authority that will be made to ensure the bill works well, has been given a lot of power but very little independence. Meaning that they have been given the power to put certain restrictions or impose certain punishments on those companies that don't follow it up. But the reality is that these organizations also are not really made in an independent manner. So there are allegations that the government may control their working as well. The third problem that the author points out here is that strong data localization mandate has not been accepted by the companies. Now, what is data localization? See, when you make a profile on Facebook, you upload your photos on Instagram, etc., all that is data that you're giving to the servers of Instagram or Facebook. Those servers are actually not placed in India, they are placed in foreign countries. Now, the problem is if the government of India, for reasons of national security, wants your data from Facebook or Instagram, they can just say that no, 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 we can't give the data because our servers, where the data is stored, is not even in India. Because the servers are not in India, because these are not Indian companies, meaning that the law of the parliament would not apply to them. Because the government cannot take that chance, if a terrorist or some other bad people are using these social media websites, the government wants the data servers to be stored within India. That is called data localization, so that they are covered under the Indian law and the government can take that data. But the companies obviously are not happy with it, because the companies choose those countries only to put their servers where they are sure the government will not forcefully take up the data, because this can also be misused by the politicians against their political opponents. So this is also a question that is still unresolved. We'll discuss more about data localization in just a few minutes. The author says that the government should not delay introducing such a bill because India has a huge population of internet users. Every single day, a huge amount of data is going online in hands of these companies, and till the time that there is no law that tells how this data will be used, this will always be in the wrong hands. The author says India has one of the highest number of data breaches in the world, where our data is misused every single day. I can give you my own example. I block at least 10 to 12 telephone numbers every single day, but I still keep getting calls from new numbers about loan, credit cards, different types of offers, and I'm sure the same is the case with you. All that is not because you gave them your number. It is because your number was sold to them by all the other organizations where you had given your details. And this is what this law of the government is trying to prevent. Now, if you just look at the timeline of how the data protection bill actually became a reality, you would see why the author is saying that this was 5 years of hard work. Because it was in August 2017 that the first time government had appointed the committee called the BN Sri Krishna Committee, who is a retired Supreme Court judge. They are the ones who gave the draft bill that was finally converted into a law that has now been taken back by the government. Now, as I said, the article makes a mention of data localization being a part of this bill. Now, data localization has been in the news for a lot of reasons, specifically because the government of India has been trying to convince or even force these social media companies to put their servers into India, but they are not agreeing to it. Now, as I said, data localization simply means that the personal data of Indians should be processed and stored within India only, so that it is governed by the laws of India and the Indian government can force the companies to share that data if it is required. However, these organizations do not want to accept the data localization requirement because one of the reasons why they actually don't want to do that is that they take a lot of pride in not being handled by the government. They think that once their servers are in India, the government of India will force them to share the data. If you look at the BN Sri Krishna committee, they also had mandated data localization to happen, but the companies did not agree. For them, it would also involve additional costs. Setting up a lot of these servers is very, very expensive. They also are not sure about the government's intentions, and that is why most of them have not agreed to it. However, it is not just India. Multiple nations across the world are worried about the same thing. All these nations want their people's data to be stored within the country. Let me give you some examples of what the other nations have done in this regard. For example, Russia has the most restrictive regulation for data flow and they have strict localization requirement, otherwise they put very high penalties on these organizations. The same is the case with China. China government mandates localization of all important data. In fact, China has gone one step ahead. You won't see apps such as Instagram or Facebook, etc. in China. China doesn't even have Google. They have their own local versions of all these big companies. So their data is obviously most of it is localized in China. The US also gives the power to the state to actually make these kind of laws. Canada and Australia also have been making multiple laws about data. Then there's another interesting example of a developing nation, Vietnam. Vietnam mandates that at least one copy of the data has to be stored in their own country so that they can at least have a look at the data, if not have complete powers over it. And maybe India can also take a leave out of these books. The next article that we have here is about the problem of media trial in the country. The reason why this article has been written is that recently the Chief Justice of India said that there is no media accountability. And it is all around us to see. If someone is arrested even just for investigation, the media reports that in such a manner that everyone starts to believe that that person is guilty. Media has a lot of powers. It reaches almost every household in the entire country. So whatever they show has the power to make a lot of good or bad impression in the minds of the people. In many of these cases, you would see even before the court gives a judgment, the media tells you whether someone is guilty or not. You saw what happened in the Sushant Singh Rajput case. No one has been found to be guilty till now, but the media, self-proclaimed, has told you who is the drug mafia, who is the killer, who is after his death, so on and so forth. All this because media knows that this is what will give them the TRP. Sensationalism is what they are running after. And the problem is, if they are found to be not true, then the only thing that they say is, I'm sorry. There is no other accountability of ruining someone's reputation. There is no accountability for placing false charges because media has so much powers. This is what Chief Justice of India has been pointing towards. That in criminal cases especially, there is a very sensational media coverage just for the TRP purposes, which actually does not augur well for the investigation. That also goes against the right of the person to have a fair trial. Because just imagine, let's say a person has been arrested by the police on some charges. It will be covered a lot in the media. Let's assume then the case goes on for 2-3 months or 2-3 years. In the end, let's assume that the court says that the person is not guilty and the person is released. Most probably you will see that when the same person is released from the jail, then you don't really have any media reporting. The media will only report when the person is arrested, but not when the person is released or when the court says that the person is not guilty. Now imagine if the same person is going and applying for jobs in certain organizations. Would the organizations want the person to work there? Most probably not. Because a media perception has been developed that this person was actually guilty, although it was never proven. So these people have a lot of hard time in finding jobs, etc. just because media has made out such an example out of them and there is no accountability of the media. This is what this article is about. The courts have directed the law enforcement authorities also not to share the details of the investigation, but it does happen. You would have seen recently also when Rahul Gandhi, for example, went to the Enforcement Directorate for investigation. In the media, there was news such as the ED asked Rahul Gandhi this question, then he responded like this. How does the media know? They are not inside the room. Rahul Gandhi did not tell them. ED is not supposed to tell them. So who is the leak here? Either the media is making it up or the ED or these kind of agencies themselves leak information because they want it to be highlighted in the media. Courts also understand this. That is why courts have repeatedly told the law enforcement authorities not to talk to media or reveal detail about the investigation. But the reality is a lot of these details are given in the media to make a public perception. So that the people also think that yes, this person has to be guilty because he is answering the questions in such a manner. The article also says that out of all the states that we have, Kerala maybe is one of those states that have worked in this direction. Kerala has, for example, disallowed photographs and parades of persons in custody within the Police Act itself. Otherwise, in other states, you would see that the police has arrested a person, media comes and takes a photo. Even if the court does not hold the person guilty later on, even then that image in the media, that photo actually circulated across the country. Although the union government has given certain guidelines, but since police is a stateless subject, it is up to the respective states to ensure that their police does not work in hand with the media. Some of the other problems also include that most police departments in India don't have a dedicated media cell. Now, in big cities, Delhi, Mumbai, etc., you have a media cell where they hold press conferences, they tell the media properly what they want. Otherwise, in smaller cities, you see individual police people just to gain some attention or just because they want to earn some money, they will start divulging details of the investigation to the media. That also should be stopped. The author says that media has a responsibility and they should ensure that just by reporting a person is arrested, their job is not done. They should clearly tell if the person is arrested because he or she is guilty or just for investigation. These are details that media people actually miss out on purpose. There is a slight bit of government regulation for media, but the problem is if the government really starts to regulate media in a very harsh manner, then also you would say that Indian democracy is not good. So there has to be a balance between the two, between the freedom of media and between the media being responsible enough to understand what to show and what not to show. Now in India, there are certain regulations in place to regulate the working of media. Let me give you some examples of that. We have the Cable Networks Act of 1995. We also have the Prasar Bharati Act of 1990. These are regulated by Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and Prasar Bharati. There are mainly 4 organizations for media regulation in India: the Press Council of India, the News Broadcasting Standards Authority, Broadcasting Content Complaints Council, and the News Broadcasters Federation. But the fact is, most of these do not really have the power to actually push the media from not doing illegal things. There's also one more concept I want to discuss. The Chief Justice of India recently, while criticizing the media, had said that media is running kangaroo courts. This is something the Chief Justice of India actually said. Now, what are kangaroo courts? Kangaroo courts again are kind of media courts only, where the person has not been proven guilty by the court, but a public perception has developed that the person is guilty outside the judicial system itself. This is called kangaroo court, where the person is presumed to be guilty even without any case ongoing. These are self-appointed mock courts where no law is followed, and because a person is shown in a negative light, that is why the person's media perception actually develops in this manner. This expression came up in Australia. As you can imagine, kangaroo courts would have to be in Australia, but it was first recorded in the US in 1849. The next article that we have here is based on the recently released NIRF rankings. NIRF here stands for National Institutional Ranking Framework. As I told you yesterday also, before reading the article, do pay attention to who has written this article. So this article is written by Mr. G.S. Bajpai, who is a Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, Punjab. He is obviously not very happy with the rankings that the NIRF has given. The theme of his article is that the NIRF rankings released by the Ministry of Education do not make much sense, and he is giving examples of why is he saying this. Also, he is not the first person to say this. If you actually go online and search about the NIRF rankings, you would see a lot of academicians actually are against these rankings because they don't really take into consideration perfect criteria. Same kind of criteria is used for different colleges for engineering, law, arts, etc., which does not really make much sense. Let's see what is he saying. He is saying that in the recently released rankings for higher education institutions, the consideration was given to teaching, learning, resources, research, etc. But the results of the rankings are very odd. For example, these rankings say that a lot of private multidisciplinary institutions in the field of law have been given a higher rank than many national law universities, which is laughable. Because you can ask any law aspirants Their first priority will always be to get into NLUs, National Law Universities. Only then they would opt for private law institutions. But the rankings show otherwise. The big problem with the ranking is it is based on data, and the data has to be submitted by these organizations themselves. Let me give you an example. So these rankings take into consideration how much money a particular college is spending on research, on giving salary to their faculties, on building labs, on research, etc. Now, for example, College A says that this year we have spent 50 crore rupees just for research purposes. And College B says that we spent 10 crore rupees for research purposes. Then College A would be given more points. The problem here is there is no verification. No one from the Ministry of Education would go to College A and actually see have they really spent this much money or not, what results have been introduced with this or not. This is a problem that the author has, that there is no verification of data by the NIRF, and the data is submitted just by these institutions individually. Also, you have to understand many of these institutions' rankings don't make sense. Why? He says that many of the law universities have told the government that they have spent, for example, 100 crore rupees to build a lab, and that is why they are given a higher ranking. But what he's saying is, in a law college, what is the purpose of building a lab? Labs are required in engineering colleges, in science, etc. But in law colleges, what do you mean by building a lab? But still, these are the things taken into consideration to give these rankings. Also, there is no transparency. The data submitted by these private organizations also cannot be seen on the website of NIRF. Even on their own individual website, that data is not really visible. You have to fill an online form, give your details if you want to see data from these institutions. Even the details of faculties, their years of experience, their expertise is missing. All of this means that these rankings cannot be trusted as per the author. The data given by the institutions about the teacher-student ratio, expenditure on research, etc. is not dependable at all. Now, I'm sure all of you would have heard about the NIRF, National Institutional Ranking Framework. This was introduced mainly because you see around the world there are different world rankings. For example, we have the QS World University Ranking, we have the Time World University Ranking, so on and so forth. In those rankings, since they are at a worldwide level, you don't see a lot of Indian institutions making the top ranks. That is why the government of India thought, let's have our own ranking published by our Ministry of Education. That is how NIRF came into being in 2015. They assess these institutions on 5 parameters, which are mentioned here: teaching, learning and resources, research and professional practice, graduation outcomes, outreach and inclusivity, peer perception. There are different categories of colleges that are taken into consideration, like engineering, medical, management, pharmacy, law, so on and so forth. The intention is in the long run, we'll make it an international ranking and not just based on India. But for that, we have to ensure that this ranking actually increases its standing and people start to believe in the authenticity. Only then the other world institutions will participate in these rankings. The next article that we have here is on ISRO's latest mission that did not really go as planned. As you would have seen in the news, on 7th of August, ISRO launched the SSLV, that is Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, which had 2 satellites, the Earth Observation Satellite number 2 and Azadi satellite. However, the mission was not a success because these satellites were not really put on the correct orbit. That is why this mission has been termed as a failure. This article talks about why did the mission fail and what is the significance of SSLV. Now, SSLV is a launch vehicle. I'm sure all of you know, for every satellite to actually go into the orbit, they are launched by a launch vehicle. After certain height, the satellite goes on its way, the launch vehicle comes back into the sea. Now, there are different varieties of launch vehicles that ISRO uses. PSLV, which is the most common, the most successful. Then we have GSLV, and now we have SSLV as well. The main difference is in the capacity. If you want to send huge, very heavy satellites, then the GSLV will be the one that will be most suitable. PSLV is for medium load satellites, But we have seen that PSLV has been the most successful one for ISRO. Almost every time that we use PSLV, that has not disappointed us. ISRO has mastered the PSLV technology. Now we are opting for a third technology called SSLV. The reason being that small satellite launch vehicles will be used for, as the name suggests, smaller satellites. So if you want to send a very small satellite like these two ones, you don't require such a big launch vehicle that would be much more expensive. So that is the entire purpose of having this kind of technology. SSLV has solid fuels. So there are two types of fuels that you actually see, solid and liquid. The difference is solid fuels give you a higher thrust, more energy, and are easier to maintain. However, the problem with solid fuels is that it is not easy to maneuver the launch vehicle. If you have to change the direction, etc., then the solid fuel will be a problem. Liquid fuel is a higher technology. Liquid fuel would give you lesser thrust, but it will also give you a chance to control the direction of the launch vehicle in a much better manner. Liquid fuel is a higher, more complex technology. SSLV only uses solid fuel in 3 levels. The article says that most probably the failure of the mission was because of a sensor not working properly. This is what ISRO has said. ISRO said that the purpose of sending these satellites was that we had to send them in a circular orbit. But by mistake, they were placed in an elliptical orbit. Circular will be this, that they will always be at equal distance from the Earth. Elliptical will be something like this, that their distance from the Earth will increase and will decrease. The problem is that these kind of satellites ideally should be in the circular orbit. The job of the sensor is to correct their orbit if the orbit is wrong, but they are not being able to do so, meaning that some of the sensors would have failed. Now, as I said, the main purpose of developing SSLV is that if you want to launch smaller satellites, then there is no need to send your big launch vehicles like PSLV, GSLV, because they are much more expensive. So that is why SSLV was being tested out. Also, the difference between circular and elliptical orbits, as I told you, is in elliptical orbits, the satellite's distance from the Earth will continue to change. It can be very close to Earth sometimes, it can be far from Earth sometimes. So what will happen is that the cameras, etc., on these satellites will have to change their focus every single time because their distance from the Earth is changing. That is why now that they are in elliptical satellites, they are not really of much use. For them to observe the Earth, to observe India specifically, they should ideally have been in a circular orbit. Usually when the satellites are sent to the space, first they are sent to elliptical orbits only because that is easier. After that they are transferred to circular orbits. This is the second step that could not happen in the SSLV launch right now. One other reason why ISRO takes up such missions is not just for India. Understand this. ISRO actually also earns a lot of foreign exchange for the government of India by giving its services to other nations. For example, US firm had actually made a contract with ISRO that they would want to send their satellites through ISRO because it will cost them much lesser as compared to doing it from America. For that, ISRO had to prove that it has been able to master the SSLV launch as well, but that did not happen. So that might also put some problems in this contract of ISRO with the US firms, and these kind of contracts are signed by ISRO from many other nations as well. This is another infographic for the SSLV which I want to share with you. You can read about it. It's a small satellite launch vehicle. It can be configured very easily. So if an order is given, for example, within 72 hours, this entire launch vehicle on its different parts can be assembled and can be ready to use. The cost launch is much lower, reduced turnaround time, so on and so forth. The next article that we have here is about a parliamentary panel's recommendations recently to give equal rights to women as well when it comes to becoming a guardian and for adoption. Now, let me tell you the background of this. In India, we have the Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act of 1956 that talks about the right of being a guardian to a child for Hindu, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, etc. Now, under this law, the problem is that under this law, the fathers have been given a priority over the mothers when it comes to being a guardian in case of a divorce, in case of separation, etc. The parliamentary panel has suggested that women should be given rights equal to the men and not subordinate to the husbands. Secondly, this law does not talk about the LGBTQ community, and the parliamentary panel suggests that the LGBTQ community should also be a part of this law. Panel says that the courts should be empowered to give joint custody to both the parents in case of separation. Right now, what happens usually, the custody in case of separation of the parents is given to the father. That is a present law. The law says that natural guardian of a Hindu minor is the father, and after him it is the mother. Now, the word after here has been debated. The court, in fact, has said earlier that the word after doesn't really mean after the death of the father only. Even when the father is alive, even then the mother can ask for custody, but her right will be secondary to the father. But this also does not place the mother equal as compared to the father. Similarly, if you look at the Muslim personal law, it is slightly different. The Muslim personal law says that the custody will be with the mother until the son reaches the age of 7 years and until the daughter reaches the age of puberty, though the father will have the general supervision and control. So in that manner, the Muslim law is different as compared to the Hindu law, and it gives priority to mother in case of a minor child. The concept of hizanat in Islam says that the welfare of the child is above everyone else. That is why the preference is given to mother over the father in terms of custody, which is not the case in the Hindu law. As I said, the Supreme Court earlier had said that the term after doesn't mean after the death of the father only the mother will take over. It means in the absence of the father, the mother shall have the right to take over. But again, this did not give equal rights to women. Again, the women has to wait that if the father is absent, then the women will become the guardian. The other problem, as I said, is that the LGBTQ community has not been made a part of this. In India, today, if you want to go and adopt a child, the LGBTQ community doesn't really have any clarification on that. For example, if you look at the eligibility criteria for adoption, it doesn't say whether LGBTQ community is allowed or it is barred. So it really is on the discretion of the authority. The eligibility criteria for adoption just says that the person should be physically, mentally and emotionally stable, financially capable, and should not have any life-threatening medical condition. Single men in India can only adopt a boy, while a woman can adopt a child of any gender. The child will only be given for adoption to a couple if they have been in a marital relation for at least 2 years or. These are the number of adoption that we see in the country, which are unfortunately on a decline. This is also a trend that the government is trying to increase, because the number of children being adopted should increase ideally, because they also would get to be a part of the family. When talk of adoption, there is one very important agency that you must be aware of. This is CARA, the Central Adoption Resource Authority. It's a statutory body and it is responsible for adoption of Indian children and is mandated to monitor and regulate not just adoptions within the country but inter-country adoptions as well. For example, if a couple comes to India from a foreign nation, wants to adopt an Indian child, that also is regulated by CARA. There is also an international convention for this called the Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption, which has been ratified by the Government of India. It deals with adoption of orphans, abandoned and surrendered children through different adoption agencies. It also makes the regulations on adoption-related matters from time to time as per the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015. Do remember, it's a statutory body working under Ministry of Women and Child Development. These are the articles we found important from the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. The attempts to include the LGBTQ community in the mainstream society would be incomplete until they are given equal rights of adoption as well. Comment. Second, discuss the significance of SSLV, that is Small Satellite Launch Vehicle for ISRO. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.